Hello, everyone. I'm sure you guys were very excited to learn that my son is stealing bacon because, you know, why would streaming time be a sacred time in the Mo house? Anywho, thank you for joining. I know it's not a court day, so I know that you guys are probably like, what are we supposed to do with our day? Going outside is too hot. Anywho, this is a continuation of the state kind of laying out the entire case against Scott Peterson, mostly because, uh, well, he wants a further DNA test uh, done on material that seems to have been um, previously tested at least 2 or 3 times. So, it is interesting to go back at a case that I did not follow at the time, and knowing what I do now know about trials to kind of see how I, as a potential in my own mind, you know, juror would react to these facts. So we had finished up sort of the part of the Christmas Eve evening where Scott finally called Lacey's parents, kind of got an entire group of people out searching, and officers had finally kind of gone back to the house and said, "Hey, it's a crime scene." So that's the part of the memo we are on. Now, I will not be getting through all 337 pages of this unless, you guys would like to have an epic throw money at Mo to save her tired voice kind of thing, but we definitely can get at least 2 hours or so further into what is going on in the Scott Peterson case. So, this is a chaotic and surreal Christmas Eve in the La Loma neighborhood. A, a suspicious person, a suspicious missing person investigation is open. After the walkthrough, the officers conferred with Sergeant Duderfelt. Based on information Sergeant Duderfelt called Detective Alan Brocchini at about 7:30 p.m. to assist with a suspicious missing person investigation. Meanwhile, police deployed various resources to search for Lacey until Detective Brocchini arrived. Between 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., officers searched the unoccupied home belonging to Greg Reed's deceased mother, located next door at 523 Covina. Officers went to East La Loma Park and continued to search for hours for any sign of Lacey. Good afternoon, Jess. Oh, um, it was actually because I had promised Mr. Mo that we would tackle, his rearranging of the laundry room today. So I didn't realize how long the Delphi memo was, and then, I have been spending all of my time going through the, just insane amount of laundry that this family produces. So I was, like, running, and then middle daughter was like, "Can you take me to work?" And I thought, "Oh, good lord." So, life is never at least not crazy in this house. Police searched 3 homeless encampments along the creek bank of the park area. There were about 7 to 8 people living there. The local fire department dispatched a water team that searched deeper areas of the creek adjacent to the park. So within hours, the police had already set up, at least in the park, looking for all possible areas that she might be within that park, according to the testimony given by Scott, that despite Lacey feeling increasingly tired, winded, and dizzy, uh, that she was going on a walk. Now, I still am privately, and this is in only my opinion, thinking that Scott might have been doing something with either medications or things like that to possibly cause Lacey to pass out and either fall into the pool or fall somewhere on a walk to make this sort of dramatic, alleged unaliving at this point in the general timeline. look more like a medical condition that happened rather than getting his hands dirty, even though poisoning his, pregnant wife would still be, murder. But I do think given his kind of general lack of, well, any sort of gumption before this point, I think he was definitely, in my opinion, as an amateur psychic and sleuth, he was trying to use poisoning first. But that's just my general opinion. That evening, Sergeant Dutterfeld coordinated for the San Luis County Sheriff's helicopter to respond and fly over the park using their infrared device called FLIR. Dispatch contacted local hospitals to check to see if any pregnant women were admitted. The officers had to clear the park of all family and friends who had responded, including the 7 or 8 homeless people, so the helicopter could search using the infrared radar. The helicopter was airborne from about 8:30 p.m. until 10 p.m., making repeated flights over the park at low altitude. The device did not pick up any readings. Brent, Lacey's brother, arrived at Lacey's house at 8:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve. He described the scene as surreal. There was a helicopter flying over with the light shining down. There were 40 people out front of Lacey's house, standing on the front lawn and in the street, taking over the neighborhood. Sharon was screaming and crying. Police officers were there and the house was taped off. It was very chaotic. Throughout the evening, 70 to 80 people showed up to help search for Lacey. Stacy and Lori asked for pictures of Lacey and they began walking the neighborhood, going door to door, including across the street, showing the photos and asking if anyone had seen Lacey. Now, it is good to remember at this point that I believe the two of the neighbors across the street and another couple across the street, one was leaving for an out of town engagement for the holidays, but the other two basically had stayed home the entire day and noted that nothing suspicious or mysterious seemed to be happening at Lacey's house, other than the fact that Scott's car was not there. Ooh, the best food of all? Is it ribs or hot wings or pizza? Pizza that you don't have to cook yourself. Those are my foods. Uh, Kim or Amy Kingbram and Tara Venable opened their house. That is the couple that basically stayed home, but were there the entire day and definitely realized that, everything looked pretty normal, except it looked like no one was home for the entire day, according to their kind of testimony to deputies or their statements to deputies. Uh, so they were asked. About this, they also allowed family and friends to use their bathroom and warmed up as it was cold that night. They provided them with coffee and water. Renee Tomlinson arrived at Lacey's house at 10:30. Good morning, Wicked Wookie. Let's see here. Oh, and was still and saw there were still 20 to 30 people, at 10:30 PM outside, including the police. The defendant had been inside the house with the police and had just came out when she got there. Where were you? A question we all want answered. And subscribe to Wicked Wookie. He has a channel. We can all, grow together. I love that part of YouTube where you can all kind of grow together. So give Wicked Wookie a chance. That would be awesome. While they waited for Detective Brauchini to arrive, the defendant arrived or remained at the house and did not attempt to search for Lacey at the park. At one point, the defendant walked up to Officer Evers and Officer Spurlock asking for an update on the search for Lacey. At the same time, Ron Gransky walked up to the defendant and asked if he went golfing as planned. The defendant hesitated, then said no, that he decided to go fishing and that it was too cold for golfing. So it's too cold to golf, but you're going to go out on a cold bay to fish? I mean, I'm not a fisher person, so I don't know. We'd need Zach here, but I'm pretty sure that, you know, what is it? That fishing out on a bay in cold water would be, well, sucktastic too, but who knows? Mr. Gransky asked the defendant if he went fishing, and the defendant replied that he went between 10 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. Mr. Gransky retorted that was pretty late to go fishing. The defendant did not answer him and walked away. Despite this, when Harvey Kemple approached the defendant that night to ask where he'd been, the defendant told Kemple he had been golfing that day. At one point, the defendant was standing by himself outside, staring straight ahead, and seemed reluctant to make eye contact with anyone. Sweetie, Scott Peterson, come here. I don't want you to be better at this because I'm kind of glad that you are this terrible at convincing anyone of your innocence because I have already labeled you uh, die a giant douche canoe. Guilty. But it is absolutely infuriating to the type A planner person in me that he went through this entire effort of weeks of planning with concrete, with a boat that he told no one about, looking up navigation, all of these things. And yet he gave no thought to how to look not super guilty and how to maybe react like a humanish person when your wife and son disappear. It's almost like you had it this close, but you just didn't pay for those extra acting classes. It is so infuriating that someone lost their lives because this man child refused to grow up and he didn't even put all that much effort into it. I don't know why I'm more upset that he didn't do a better job unaliving her. I know that's an odd thing to be irritated about, but it just seems like such a waste, and it goes against everything a not trash water human being should do, and I can't keep my petty out of it because he just was it's like he had point A to point B of her gone, and then, it is the classic narcissistic inability to see the person that they are taking out, this obstacle to whatever they feel has been taken away from them, as a real person. It's the same thing that tripped up Joel Guy Jr., it tripped up, uh, Chandler Halderson. Heck, it's even tripped up Courtney Clenny and, Sarah Boone. They honestly believe that we, the general public, Justice Department, or what have you, will treat these victims as, the obstacles they were in their life, that they aren't independent human beings with people that care about them the same way that, everyone else has it. It's that really interesting blind spot that is actually very, very disconcerting to me because it seems like something that would be obvious. But I guess if you can relate to, empathize, and completely understand humanity, you can't do crimes. You can't do these unalivings. So I guess that this has been a 5-minute TED talk of Mo talking to herself, realizing why this bothers her because these people aren't, empathetic human beings. Anywho, let's get back. Uh, The defendant and Brent never spoke that night, even though they had a great relationship. Sharon walked up to get the defendant a hug because everyone was upset, and since she was close with the defendant, she was trying to console him because his family was not there. However, when she tried to give the defendant a hug, he kept angling away from her and would not make eye contact. Sharon asked the defendant what Lacey was doing that day. The defendant said that Lacey had planned to go to the store, then come home and make gingerbread and walk the dog. Sharon questioned where the defendant was, and he replied with one word: fishing. Sharon asked the defendant where he was fishing, and he responded, Berkeley. Sharon asked him what time he got home, and the defendant answered around 4:45. Blood on my truck. Sandy Rickard was standing by herself on the front lawn when the defendant walked up to put his hands up. He said, I wouldn't be surprised if they find blood on my truck because cut my hand all the time. I'm a hunter, I'm a fisherman, sportsman, outdoorsman. Sandy was adamant the defendant used the words on my truck, but could not recall the specific term that the defendant used, but knew it was something to the effect of being a sportsman or outdoors person. Sandy was perplexed by this comment or what prompted the defendant to say that to her, especially since he had not spoken to her all that night. Later that evening, Detective Bracconi observed a small cut on the middle knuckle of the defendant's right index finger. In a following interview with Detective Gorgon, who had taken over as lead investigator, the defendant indicated he cut his knuckle when he had reached into the door panel storage area on the driver's side door. Detective Grogan talked to the defendant several times on December 30th and recorded the conversations. During one of those conversations, the defendant again mentioned that there might be blood on his truck because he cut his hands, quote unquote, every day. The defendant then revised his statement to say he cut his hand that day, referring to Christmas Eve. He said it happened when he reached inside the side pocket of the door. Referring to Detective Brocchini, the defendant said, I mean, I know Alan looked at my hands and he noticed cuts on my hands, so he knows. The defendant elaborated, quote, I don't know what it was, probably just a door or pocket or something. Knuckle, still my hand. I know you know I keep cutting it, handling out flyers, so it's the reason I keep remembering it. Well, he also has a wonderful command of the English language. What an absolute moron. That's like, hey, guys, look, I understand that my wife and child are missing, but if I happen to have a boat I've told no one about and anchors, it's simply because I'm just a cool guy that likes to fish. I mean, sir, you are looking all the guilty. The cops were like, and guilty. During the execution of a subsequent search warrant, authorities located 4 areas of suspected blood in the defendant's truck. Later analysis confirmed that 3 of the 4 stains were, in fact, the defendant's blood. People's Trial Exhibit 116B, pictured below, shows some of the defendant's blood stains on the driver's side door panel located during the forensic examination of the defendant's truck. The defendant's blood was also found in 2 small spots on the master bedroom's white duvet cover during a subsequent search warrant for bedding in February 2003. Defendant learns a neighbor found Mackenzie. At 8:48 p.m., the defendant called Karen Servas and asked if she knew where Lacey was, and she told him no. The defendant said Lacey was missing and that there were people in the park and a helicopter searching for her. Karen told the defendant she was out of town at a Christmas party. However, she indicated she had found Mackenzie that morning. The defendant asked her to repeat that and handed the phone to a detective. Karen explained how she located Mackenzie standing in the street in front of the defendant's home at an estimated time of around 11:30 a.m. Christmas Eve photos capture physical evidence, Detective Brocchini's walkthrough. Detective Brocchini arrived at 523 Covina Avenue between 9:30 p.m. and 10 p.m. Detective Brocchini's initial role was to find Lacey and eliminate Scott Peterson as a suspect since he was the last person to see Lacey. Officer Evers briefed him on unusual things that the officers had noted thus far, including the defendant's conversation with Officer Spurlock. Officer Spurlock was the one that he kind of had this fishing conversation with, and he couldn't basically say what type of fish he was looking for or what kind of bait he used. So things that might have been important to research earlier on Ask Jeeves Scott. Dingus. Well, now I can't even use dingus anymore. Dingleberry. David Bracchini introduced himself to the defendant and asked if he could walk through his house again. They walked to the bedroom where Detective Bracchini looked at Lacey's purse and hung it back on the hook. In the second bedroom of the closet, there was a Nike bag on the floor right in front of the open closet door, unzipped, with a partial raincoat or something sticking out of it. There was another duffel bag in the closet that had fallen off the shelf and was hanging upside down on the hangers. There were two empty spaces on the top shelf that appeared to be where the duffel bags had been stored. The defendant explained that he was a bit of a slob and that's why the duffel bags were displaced. Detective Bracchini asked the defendant if he had removed something from the bag, and the defendant explained he took white tennis shoes out earlier that day and put them on his wet bar. Why would you put shoes on a wet bar? David Bracchini did not see any white tennis shoes on the defendant's wet bar. The defendant had already washed the clothes he wore fishing. They walked into the converted family TV room where the wash machine was located with wet rags piled on top. Despite telling the detective he was a slob, the defendant explained he had taken the rags out of the wash machine. You absolute no, he is all the guilty. This absolute asshat took out dirty. Look, I may have a little bit of a trigger for this but when you have a bunch of people and maybe teenage girls want to wear a particular outfit and they have removed wet clothes from the laundry, but instead of rotating the laundry into the dryer, they just put it in a basket there for you. Uh, it's a bit infuriating. So, he's guilty right now because he done took dirty clothes out of there instead of just throwing his clothes on top. I mean, they're rags. You don't need to bleach them. Look, I gave up on that a long time ago. Maybe he's a little different, but for the love of Cheetos, how dare you take dirty clothes out of the out of the laundry and not actually do them? Mo has completely flipped. I don't care about evidence. He is all the guilty now because this is some BS. Inside the wash machine was a damp pair of men's jeans, a blue t shirt, and a green pullover. Items had been washed and gone through the spin cycle. The defendant confirmed those were the clothes he wore fishing that day. Swear to God, you washed three things and you couldn't keep the rags in there to help you wash them? I mean, sir, I'm glad everyone else feels my pain. You guys are like, "Well, we need something to do, and we'll just listen to Mo rant about laundry." People's Trial Exhibit number 37CC, shown above, is the dirty, wet rags that were placed on top of the wash machine, which contained the defendant's clothes that he wore fishing on December 24th, 2002. Defendant straightens rug at the door leading to the driveway. Detective Brocchini asked the defendant for permission to look in his and Lacey's vehicles. As they walked into the converted family room towards the door that leads to the driveway, Officer Evers noticed for the first time that the rug located in front of the door had been scrunched all the way up to the door jamb. The door was closed. Evers found this odd and asked the defendant if the rug was always like that. The defendant replied that the cat or dog must have been playing in there. The defendant then walked toward the rug and tried to use his foot to straighten it out. Below is a photo of what the rug looked like after the defendant attempted to straighten it on December 24th, 2002. Well, I mean, this does look like it was straightened by someone who's not afflicted with any sense of OCD, because this would have killed my soul right there. Not to mention, bending over to straighten it like a human being with your opposable thumb and fingers takes all of 10 more seconds. Yes, I might be speaking as a mother here, but holy cow, this stuff infuriates me. Lacey's cell phone. The defendant gave officers permission to look at Lacey's green Land Rover and the defendant's truck. Lacey's green Land Rover was parked facing into the driveway while the defendant's pickup truck had been backed into the driveway and the bed of the truck was facing the fence. Lacey's vehicle was unlocked and Detective Brocchini found her cell phone plugged into the battery charger. Uh, Footnote number 43, Sharon Rocha told Lacey after her first dizzy episode, Lacey need to make sure to carry her cell phone with her if she was going to walk. So why would, she be charging her phone in her car if allegedly she was going to a walk? Now, I know pregnant women can get a little flighty towards the end, middle, and beginning of pregnancy, but yeah, this doesn't seem like she was planning to go walking. It seems like she was probably planning to go to the grocery store. But that's just my opinion. Detective Brocchini retrieved Lacey's cell phone. However, when he tried to power it on, the battery was too weak to turn on. The later, the defendant contradicted himself in an interview, which discussed in further detail below with Captain Chris Boyers regarding Lacey's keys. Captain Boyers asked the whereabouts of Lacey's keys and whether Lacey had them when she walked the dog. The defendant claimed he had taken Lacey's keys out of her purse to look in her car. This was a discrepancy with the defendant's earlier statement to Sharon Rocha in the park, indicating that the defendant did not know if Lacey's purse was at home or not. Furthermore, this was inconsistent with the evidence where Officer Spurlock retrieved Lacey's purse from the closet, and with the defendant standing next to them, they found the keys and other contents inside the purse. Hello, Captain Kern. Marina receipt. Just before David Brocchini began searching the defendant's truck, Officer Evers asked the defendant if he had any proof that he was at the Berkeley Marina. The defendant responded by offering a parking receipt from the Berkeley Marina, which he retrieved from his ashtray. Contrary to what the defendant told Officer Evers early about arriving at the marina around noontime, the receipt showed that the defendant arrived around 12:54 p.m. that day. So you have Scott telling one of his friends that he arrived to fish between 10 and noon, but the receipt for the parking area of the marina is showing that he arrived at 12:54, which gives him a lot longer of a time to be away from the house, not accounted for, but to also, be doing whatever it was he was allegedly doing that day. 3 large patio umbrellas, 2 tarps, and unopened fishing lures. Detective Brocchini asked the defendant to unlock his truck, which he did by using his remote control key fob. The detective stood on the top of the driver's side tire and inspected the content of the pickup truck. Defendant had 3 large patio umbrellas wrapped up in a blue tarp lying inside the bed of the truck. There were also tan canvas tarps which had been balled up or bunched and pulled all the way or pushed all the way next to the defendant's green toolbox. At the time, Detective Brocchini did not realize this was to cover to the defendant's boat. When Detective Brocchini opened the passenger door of the defendant's truck to look inside, the door bumped Lacey's Land Rover. Concerned about his vehicle, the defendant offered to hold his leather glove between the door and Lacey's Land Rover or move the truck. Detective Brocchini apologized and indicated he would be more careful. Inside the defendant's truck was a Big Five sporting goods bags containing 2 new fishing lures, which were still inside their packaging. Let's see. At trial, the jury was shown the contents of People's Trial Exhibit number 74, which included a silver fishing lure still inside its packaging. There was a receipt in the bag that indicated that the lures, a fishing pole, and a 2-day fishing license had been purchased for 4 days earlier on December the 20th. In the back seat was a camouflage jacket that the defendant indicated he wore while he was fishing. Well, you need to wear camo so the fish can't see you. The coat was dry when Detective Brocchini touched it, even though later that night the defendant told the detective he had been wearing the jacket when it started raining while he was in the boat. Dang precipitation and evaporation foiling you. Dang it. The defendant had a loaded handgun in his glove compartment. He told Detective Brocchini that he forgot it was in there and that he'd went pheasant hunting a month ago in Lone Pine with his father. I would think you would use a bird shot or something for pheasant. Not being a pheasant hunter by trade, I have no idea what you would use, but it seems a little odd. Detective Brocchini took the gun for possible evidence. 45. Additionally, in California, it is illegal to carry a loaded hand weapon in a vehicle because while in a public place or public streets, it's a violation of the California statute, formerly known as Penal Code Section 12031. Oh, thank you, Wolfram. I had no idea, but I thought that sounded wrong. I thought there were actually pheasant specific calibers or pew pews. I have no idea. Let's see. Later that morning at around he didn't tell the defendant that he was taking the gun. Later that morning at around 2:15 a.m., the defendant called Detective Brocchini and questioned if the detective took the defendant's handgun. Detective Brocchini confirmed that he had taken the gun. The defendant said he wished he would have told him that he was taking it. There was no electricity at the warehouse. The defendant was cooperative and agreed to show Detective Brocchini and Officer Evans his boat located at his warehouse at 1027 North Emerald in Modesto. When they arrived at 11:05 p.m., the defendant unlocked the single man door that led into the office portion of the warehouse. They walked inside and it was dark. The defendant said there was no electricity. Detective Brocchini had seen computer and machines sitting on the desk of the small office, but did not press the defendant further about not having electricity. He assumed the defendant meant there was no electricity to the warehouse. Therefore, that Christmas Eve night, Detective Brocchini used his flashlight to search. He saw a fax sitting on the table in the office with a date and time of December 24th, 2002 at 11:15 a.m. or 11:30 a.m. The defendant said he'd received a fax before he went out fishing. David Brocchini asked the defendant how the fax could be sitting on the table if he was driving to the bay to go fishing at the time. Dang you, time. He responded that the time on the fax was New Jersey time, 3 hours ahead. I don't think it works that way, but good try, Scott. The defendant then changed his answer and said he thought he received and read the fax before he went fishing, but it could have been when he got back and set it on the table, but continued to claim that it had New Jersey time on it. Next, Detective Brocchini asked the defendant if he could roll up the large bay door since there was no electricity to the shop and he would move his car to shine his headlights inside in order to illuminate inside the dark warehouse. Using the headlights and his flashlights to illuminate the interior, the officers observed a 14-foot aluminum boat, a flatbed trailer, a forklift, a bunch of pallets with some type of product. There was some water in the bottom of the inside of the boat, which indicated it had been somewhere near water. Detective Brocchini observed a couple fishing poles, a tackle box, a spare tire, a small 6-foot red rope, and a homemade cement anchor inside the boat. He looked inside the tackle box and saw a bunch of old jigs, lures, and things. Detective Brocchini took out his camera and took a few pictures of the boat and the police car, which were test photos to make sure his flash was working. These photos, depicted below, were taken on December 24th, 2002, and marked as People Trial Exhibits numbers 70N through 70X. While Brocchini was taking photos of the boat, the defendant told him not to let the defendant's boss see him taking pictures. Weird, but you are the boss of this company, you dingus. Among the items in the boat mentioned above, there was also a pair of handled pair of needle nose pliers and a life preserver. People's Trial Exhibit number 70Q, shown below a photo inside of the defendant's boat on December 24th, 2002. Officers continued to search throughout that Christmas Eve night. By 11 p.m., there was a shift change and additional officers had arrived, and the officers who were due to get off work were deployed back to the park. Sergeant Duderfield's patrol vehicle that was outside 523 Covina Avenue served as a makeshift command post. He directed officers on where to go and what to do. He directed officers to canvass the neighborhood. Officers searched other nearby parks. Sergeant Heller took over direction of the search of the park. That night, a canine officer searched the park. They also searched along the creek. Sergeant Duderfeld left the home at 12:30 a.m. The identification technician Doug Lovell, who was taking photos, was still there. Between 11 p.m. and midnight, the police told the family to go home for the night as there was nothing more they could do at the time. Sharon told the defendant to come over to her house when he was finished with the police because she did not want him to be there alone. Sharon told Detective Brocchini to drop the defendant off at her house when he was finished because he did not want him to be alone. The defendant never came over that night. Brent asked the defendant if he wanted to come over to his mom's house to stay the night, and the defendant said no. The defendant was surprised that Brent was going to spend the night at his mother's house and not drive back to Sacramento. And see, here, this is a little bit of that real inability to see other people as fully functional, fully formed humans in their own right, because he's like, "Why aren't you just going home? Like, it's just your sister. I'm sure she'll be back someday or maybe never, but why would you let that mess up his plan or your plans?" Because if Scott didn't have to be there physically to answer questions and the police would have, taken maybe a more lackadaisical, you know, response, that's exactly how Scott would have reacted. I mean, if no one had noticed that Lacey was gone as quickly as she was, Scott would have probably gone over to his girlfriend's house and just been like, "I thought she was with you. I wasn't worried about it." Lacey's friends left at midnight and went to the copy store to make numerous missing person flyers. Can't sleep, the family is still out looking for Lacey. After midnight, Brent dropped Amy off at her car, which was parked in front of Lacey's house, and they spoke with their stepbrother and his girlfriend, who were still there. The Modesto Police Department crime scene van and officers were still at the house. They had been advised that the defendant had not returned home yet from the police department. Amy called the defendant and he answered during his interview with Detective Brocchini. She indicated she was outside his and Lacey's house with Nate and Brent. After dropping Amy off, Brent could not sleep, and about 7 or 3 a.m., he went back to Lacey's house and drove around. By this time, the police and patrol cars were gone and the house was all dark. Brent did not try to make contact and wake the defendant. As soon as the sun came up on Christmas Day, the family wanted to start searching for Lacey. Absolutely, that's what I would want to do. At 7 a.m., Brent called the defendant and told him that they were coming over to search Dry Creek Park. Sharon, Ron, and Brent arrived back at the house at 7:30. Brent had parked his truck in the street, however, he blocked vehicles parked in Lacey's driveway. The defendant had just gotten out of the shower and answered the door in a towel. Once the defendant got dressed and put Mackenzie on a leash, they started walking toward the park, but separated. The defendant walked Sharon over to a neighbor's house and left her with the friend, while Ron and Brent went over to search the park for Lacey. At around 7:30 to 8 a.m., Stacy Boyers and Lori Ellsworth returned to the defendant's house, where there were about 10 people. They initially set up a volunteer center at the house, and volunteers were gathering to collect flyers they had made and left them to pass out. The police search intensifies. At about 8 a.m., police officers began to coordinate a massive search. Streets were lined with patrol cars and volunteers. There were people in the park and people looking for Lacey in the creek. About 10 to 15 police officers canvassed the Covina neighborhood, including searching yards and alleyways. There were officers on bicycles, horses, canine units, and also tactical patrols. So Scott definitely underestimated the search force that would be deployed and all of the different resources that the police and technically the feds, if it could be found that she might have been a kidnapping victim, can bring to bear on these missing persons cases. I think a lot of people who do these type of things do not realize the resources that will be brought to bear against them. There are some detectives who are good detectives and like pit bulls and will not allow someone doing something to an innocent woman or man for that matter to go unpunished. There were no media trucks on Covina Avenue at this time. It wasn't Lacey. Susan Aquino, Lacey's aunt, and her husband returned to the defendant's house on Christmas morning. A police officer knocked on the defendant's door and told the defendant that two witnesses who saw Lacey walking over the walking bridge in the park. Susan was excited about the news, asked the defendant what he thought, and the defendant replied, "It wasn't Lacey. She doesn't go that way." The defendant makes a trip to his warehouse and returns with duct tape. At 8 a.m., the defendant wanted keys to Brent's truck so he could move it and get his truck out of the driveway. The defendant wanted to go to his warehouse. He told Brent that he wanted to get tape to hang up missing posters and flyers. The defendant, however, did not return for a couple hours. "Okay, Letitia, I need to go out and do some stuff," in the middle of doing stuff around the house. I mean, sir, could you be, like, any more obvious in your absolute terrible ability to plan criming? Now, during this time, Amber tried calling his cell phone that Christmas morning. However, the defendant did not answer. At around 8:09 a.m., the defendant called her back using the defendant's second cell phone and indicated he would call her later that evening. Around 10 a.m., the defendant returned from his warehouse with a roll of silver gray duct tape because there are no Walgreens, Dollar Trees, Walmarts, Targets, hell, even gas stations near about. Sir, you are the dumbest part of dumb. At this point, Brett and the defendant walked the neighborhood together, hanging up flyers using the duct tape. 47. At that time, no one knew that Lacey's body would wash up almost 4 months later or that she would have duct tape on her person. A press conference. The defendant and Brett headed back to the house between 10:30 and 12 p.m. because a media truck was coming to Lacey's and the defendant's house for a noon shoot. The defendant said he did not want to talk to the media and only people he wanted to talk to were Sharon and Brent. However, when Brent and other family members would ask the defendant questions about what Lacey was wearing and if those clothes were still at the house, the defendant was not interested in checking into that. The defendant went into the house and never came out while the press was there. 49. The defendant did not appear to be upset, nor was he shy or incapable of speaking in front of a crowd, as he took the microphone at Rose and Brent's wedding and gave a 10-minute impromptu speech to a group of more than 100 people, which was video recorded without a problem. Sir, you are terrible at this. Instead, Brent and two of Lacey's friends spoke to the media to get word out about Lacey missing. They also took Mackenzie out there so the media would know what the dog looked like. Before 1 p.m., the police also did a brief press conference at the Modesto Police Department on Christmas Day with Detective Brocchini and some members of the family. After the press conference, the defendant agreed to meet with Detective Grogan while his family and friends returned to the house to continue to post flyers. Christmas Day 2002, Christmas interviews and attempts to eliminate the defendant as a suspect. About midnight on Christmas Day, Detective Bracchini began an hour-long recorded interview with the defendant at Modesto Police Department. Initially, Detective Bracchini's role in the investigation was to determine whether the defendant could be eliminated as a suspect and locate Lacey. The defendant's demeanor was calm, cool, and relaxed, and he was not emotional during the interview. After the interview ended around 1:30 a.m., Detective Brocchini dropped the defendant off at home. He called the detective 45 minutes later asking about his firearm. "Sir, you are a criminal genius. I can't imagine why they caught you." Later Christmas Day, around 11:30 p.m., the defendant agreed to meet with Detective Craig Grogan, who had taken over as the lead investigator in the case. California Department of Justice investigator Douglas Mansfield joined the interview of the defendant on December 25th, 2000, and two. They wanted to re-interview the defendant because the defendant was likely to have the most information as Lacey's husband, the person closest to Lacey, the one who discovered she was missing, and the last person to see Lacey alive. The purpose of the interview was to obtain information about the days leading up to Lacey's disappearance, along with background information on Lacey's family, to find out if anything occurred before Christmas Eve that would have caused Lacey to voluntarily leave on her own, and secure any information that would serve to eliminate the defendant as a suspect. This interview was not recorded. Darn you, police! Why? In discussing his activities on Christmas Eve, the defendant said he had no prior experience in San Francisco Bay, fishing in San Francisco Bay. He researched the internet and decided on Berkeley area. Defendant said it was too cold to golf. He opted to drive about 180 miles round trip to fish on the bay, although he was only in the water for about an hour. Yeah, that makes sense. He went trolling for fish as he made his way to Brooks Island and back. As for Lacey's activity, the defendant told Gorgon and Mansfield that she walked almost every day. He detailed the path she usually took down, or from Covina down to East La Loma Park. The defendant said that Lacey had been wearing some of the jewelry she inherited when he last saw her on Christmas morning, although he thought it was possible that Lacey wore it when she went walking in the park and a transient robbed her of jewelry and kidnapped her. Investigator Mansfield specifically asked the defendant if there were any problems in his marriage or if any third parties were involved. Yeah, like your side chick, dude. The defendant said neither he nor Lacey were involved with anyone outside the marriage. Survey says that's a lie. Uh, that defendant told Detective Gorgon that Lacey woke up before he did that morning. They both ate breakfast. They watched part of the Today Show and Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart was making a marinade or something to that effect for French toast. A marinade for French toast? I'm willing to listen, but generally it's like almost like a custard mix. Anywho, Lacey was mopping the floor when he later left and decided to go fishing. The defendant told Detective Gorgon that he left the house and went to his warehouse located on North Emerald Avenue. When he arrived at his office, he checked email on his computer and received email about a golf bag he was selling on eBay on his work computer. Huh. The internet only went out for Christmas. Look, We're a very Christian country, and we just turn off the electricity on Christmas, according to Scott Peterson, but only in his warehouse because he's the most devoted of all. Uh, he sent an email to his employer and put together a moistier, a woodworking tool. Mortar mortiser? Look, some kind of woodworking tool. After putting that together, the defendant told David Gorgon that he cleaned up his office, unloaded some tools from his own toolbox, then attached his boat and trailer to the truck, and left about uh, 11 a.m. for Berkeley Marina. Once he arrived at the marina, the defendant described going to an island a short distance north of Berkeley Marina, which had trash around the island. He trolled, fishing, trolling on his way there and back. After this interview, Detective Gorgon determined he needed to eliminate the defendant as a suspect and completed a search warrant for the defendant's house, vehicles, and warehouse. Inconsistencies. Doggone it. Those'll get you every time. With the defendant's statements. Throughout the investigation, the officers determined there were multiple inconsistencies with the defendant's statements. There were also statements the defendant made during his interviews, which, while they could not be directly disproven, seemed illogical. Number one, a morning decision to golf. In the first interview with Detective Brocchini, the defendant said he decided to go fishing that morning. He chuckled as he told Detective Brocchini that it seemed too cold to go play golf, so he decided to go fishing. As discussed in greater detail below, this was inconsistent with evidence that indicated that the defendant had filled out a fishing license he purchased 4 days earlier from Big Five, with the date of issue being 2020 or December the 23rd, and the 2 days he would fish were the 23rd and 24th. Let's see. No map, just winging it. During the interview with David Brocchini, the defendant claimed he did not have an area map for the bay. He was just going to wing it, as you do. Sure, the Titanic thought the same thing. Nothing bad ever happened there. This was inconsistent with what he had told Detective Gorgon in Mansfield. In that interview, the defendant indicated that although he had no prior uh, experience fishing in San Francisco Bay, he had researched the internet and decided on Berkeley area. Furthermore, the physical evidence indicating that the defendant was not just winging it. In fact, a forensic examination of the defendant's computers showed that the defendant, on December 8th, researched and reviewed maps of the Marina, including information on trailering and boat parking, before he even purchased a boat on December the 9th, 2002. The defendant had also pre purchased a fishing license with an ocean endorsement on December 20th, 2002, which expired on December 31st, 2002. During a search warrant with the defendant's warehouse, police located a printout related to the defendant's internet search on fishing. Martha Stewart and meringue. Now, I vaguely remember this being a big part of how they kind of, well, at least a little piece in the puzzle of how they figured out this man has never been to a town called Truth. He has not even had a postcard sent to him from there. He simply doesn't know the zip code of Truth. Excuse me. All right, let's see. Defendant said that he and Lacey were watching Lacey's favorite show, Martha Stewart, and told Detective Bikini that Martha was talking about something to do with meringue. The defense or defendant told Detective Gorgon that they had watched part of the Today Show and Martha was making a marinade or something for French toast. The police obtained copy of the Martha Stewart show that aired on December 23rd and the 24th. The December 24th, 2002 show aired at 9 a.m. in the Modesto area, and there was a comment about making meringue. However, this occurred 48 minutes into the show, which was just at 9:49 a.m. Thus, if the defendant left at 9:30 as he claimed, there would be no way he would have heard this portion of the show. The defendant left at 9:30 a.m. The defendant said both in his interview and to multiple officers that he left the house at 9:30 a.m. Again, his statement was inconsistent with the evidence. Upon further investigation, the defendant's cell phone records showed that the defendant actually left his house 38 minutes later at 10:08 a.m. Mary Anderson, custodian of records for AT&T, brought in AT&T fraud records for the defendant's cell phone number, along with cell site conversion cards and a physical cell site location chart. I know, I saw that, and Hollywood, don't hurt us again. Let Mel Brooks do us a solid and make sure Hollywood doesn't hurt us again. But Spaceballs 2, unless Mel Brooks is in charge of every single creative decision and the studio does F all, I'm gonna be really ticked off because 'cause they're gonna ruin it. They're gonna make it about intersectional feminism and the Schwartz is female, and I just can't. And good afternoon, Dally. Guys, check out, Sal. He does a lot of really in-depth trial stuff. He gets FOIA requests and does kind of like what I'm doing here, only with funner cases. I mean, to be honest, the Mark Jensen case is interesting. So definitely check out Sal if you like to learn some more deep dives. Sal is really good at getting like FOIA requests and things like that. So if you want to go deeper than the surface of the case, like most people do, he is definitely one of the people to look at. And you're welcome, Sal. The defendant called his voicemail to retrieve his messages on December 24th, 2002 at 10:08 a.m. The AT&T switch connected the call to cell tower located at 1250 Brighton Avenue, which services the defendant's house and the Covina Avenue neighborhood. As the defendant continued to drive, he continued to listen to his voicemail messages. The call switched over to the cell tower located at 10th and D, a water tower in Modesto, which was consistent with the defendant driving away from his home and toward his warehouse at 10:08 a.m. Lacey was mopping. The defendant said Lacey was mopping the kitchen floor when he left and she was going to finish cleaning up. Lacey was mopping the tile in the entryway. When Detective Brocchini inquired further, the defendant indicated that Lacey was pretty fastidious and she always had a vacuum or mop out. Well, probably because she knew you couldn't handle one of those things or any of those things and knew not to count on you. I mean, I'm pretty sure that unfortunately, in her heart of hearts, Lacey probably knew Scott Peterson wasn't the man she wanted him to be. And what I find really sad and heartbreaking the most is that she had probably ignored those warning signs, those niggling feelings she had in the back of her head, thinking it will get better. It will get better. He'll grow up. He'll see this baby. He'll just need this baby to see this baby. And had she just, maybe made peace with the fact that, yeah, her marriage was going nowhere. Her husband wasn't the man that he should have been. Then she and Connor could have been living with her parents. And yeah, it's not the way she probably ever expected her life to go. She expected to have the white picket fence and everything with Scott. But it just hurts me to know that she probably was ignoring a lot of these red flags because she so desperately wanted this perfect family. And had she been a little honest and dealt with that, not insignificant heartbreak, that she would maybe still be here. And that's really one of the things that I have a hard time wrapping my head around. The fact that because Lacey was trying her best to will this family into existence, she lost her life, and that just it grates on me. It grates on me because I have been that person that's ignoring all of the red flags, because sometimes they're really, really painful to have to sit out and examine that, the relationship you thought you had, the partner you thought you had was someone you made up in your head and not the person you're actually with. And it just hurts me to know that she kept fighting for this thing, and that's what ended up probably. I realized that as I said it, but I was, like, lingering. I was like, "Daggone it, YouTube, stop being a pain in my behind." During the investigation, detectives learned that the Petersons had hired Margarita Nava to start cleaning their home near the same time Lacey began to experience dizzy episodes and feel uncomfortable. Detectives spoke with Margarita Nava and said she had just finished cleaning the entire house on December the 23rd. The very last thing she did before she left the house at 2:30 p.m. was to mop all the floors. They also learned that Lacey complained of being extremely tired lately and needed to rest often. Lacey can't lift the mop bucket. The defendant claimed during the interview that he filled up the bucket and Lacey had him set the bucket by the front door because she was 8 months pregnant and couldn't pick it up for anything. Absolutely, Captain Kern. I am so sorry for your loss, but this applies to everyone, boy, girl, Zim Zer, as your internet adopted mother. If someone There is no shame in someone turning out to be not the person that you thought they were. It is not a weakness on yours that maybe they didn't live up to all of the things that they promised to be. If the person you love and care about is throwing these red flags up, it is not your fault that you didn't maybe notice them as first as they came up. You know, once you do, have the courage to look at them truthfully in your own eyes. It is not your fault if the person turns out to be not the person that you need in your life. But what can be your fault is if you continue to ignore those things, if you keep making excuses, and if you refuse to see things because they hurt. I know it sucks. I know it is never the funnest thing to realize you maybe expended a lot of your heart and effort into something that's just not going to happen, but it's better than being hurt so deeply or losing your life. So take it from your internet adopted mother. It's not a shortfall or a weakness in you. The other person has stuff that they need to deal with. Your current stuff that you're dealing with is because of their stuff they're not dealing with. But you can't fix another person unless they want to fix themselves. And you can't make it better by ignoring it. Absolutely, Captain Kern. I will attempt to DM you today, but I definitely want to do a panel discussion about things like this because I think that it's it's very easy to fall into the trap of maybe not noticing those goals. And maybe if people realize that the shame isn't theirs, that you noticing the red flags isn't, you know, a terrible thing. It's protecting yourself, that it'll help if it can just help one person, maybe not go through things I went through or that Captain Kern has to live with, then I would be totally on board doing one of those. Let's see. Now, the defendant gave one of two reasons why he moved the mop bucket outside. was because Lacey couldn't lift anything heavy. However, this was inconsistent with evidence. Margarita Navi spoke about Lacey carrying in the grocery bags one or two at a time from the car the day before and sitting them on the door stoop, where she assisted Lacey and carried them the rest of the way into the house. Lacey also carried in a plant in one hand and a container of food in the other, while walking a short distance in heels to Stacy Boyer's Christmas party 10 days earlier. Lacey walked almost every day and planned to walk the dog. The defendant claimed during the interview with Detective Brocchini that Lacey planned to walk the dog on Christmas Eve morning. The defendant told Grogan and Mansfield that Lacey walked almost every day and detailed how Lacey walked down the path at the end of their street into East Laloma Park. However, at trial, the jury heard overwhelming evidence that contradicted the defendant's claims that Lacey, let's see, uh, planned to take Mackenzie for a walk, and then she walked him every day. As mentioned above, Lacey stopped teaching in November 2002 because she had become very. Well, I'm sure you guys needed to know that middle son needs to use the restroom. During the same month, Petersons hired housekeeper Margarita Nava to begin cleaning their house twice a month. Indeed, Nava noticed that while she was cleaning their house the day before, Lacey had seemed tired and sat on the couch with her feet up. Although Lacey enjoyed taking Mackenzie for walks early in her pregnancy, in late October or early November of 2002, Lacey told her mother and sister she'd become dizzy and vomited during the walk. Now, this is where I do question, and where I kind of feel like Scott Peterson was attempting to give Lacey something to induce one of these dizzy or lightheaded spells, either when she walked to make her death appear, legitimately accidental instead of, her pieces of her washing up on a bay, or to fall in their backyard pool. Given everything I know about Scott Peterson, and I'm no FBI, Clarice, if you want. But he seems like the person that didn't really think this whole boat thing through. He had it as a backup, but he was coming down to the wire, and Lacey had done sort of intelligent things by, stepping back from exercising, not doing as much. So, how was he going to get her to have, let's say, allegedly, an accident? And this is all, of course, speculation, but I do think that it is very mysterious that she was feeling so terribly, considering, that her pregnancy seemed to fall within normal parameters. She didn't have any signs of preeclampsia or iron deficiency or anything like that that has been noted in what the state has presented thus far. So that's why this keeps, kind of nagging me in the back of my brain that for someone like Scott Peterson, who wants to perpetually be the good guy, the kind of funny, jovial guy, seen as, the loving husband, even though he's not very good at that role, he definitely uses Lacey in that particular relationship to keep his, good social standing in the community and with his family. And what other people feel about him seems to be very important to him. So I do definitely feel like that there was many plans probably in place, and that unfortunately the kind of maybe making her dizzy, getting her to fall down, getting some sort of medical issue to happen somewhat spontaneously did not work out. So he had to resort to this sort of shipshod plan that he kind of had in place. Let's see here. Um, so On November 6th, Lacey did report to her obstetrician, Dr. Andraki, that she had been experiencing symptoms of dizziness and lightheadedness when she walked. It happened twice that very day, once during the week prior. Andraki had recommended that Lacey stay hydrated and refrain from exercise. However, if she did exercise, that she should do it later in the day. On November 8th, Lacey called the doctor's office and reported that she was feeling shortness of breath while walking. Now, for any of those of you that have not been huge enormously pregnant, around 8 to 7 months, depending on how many children you've had. For those of us that have had all of the children, it can be around month 6 for us. But around month 7, month 8, your organs are pretty much just smushed. So feeling sort of short of breath is not uncommon. And again, all of these symptoms could have been modified or magnified, and I could be way out in left field, um, because your first pregnancy, every little different thing you notice. Any subsequent other pregnancy, you are dealing with an already small human person that responds to no logic. So you don't really have time to kind of sit and agonize and really pay attention to your body all the time. So while these could be very normal pregnancy things, this just seems to not gel for me. Now, after doing this, her mother sensed that after this incident that Lacey took her doctor's advice more seriously. During this same time, Lacey complained to Sharon about her feet swelling, having back pain, and feeling tired frequently. I mean, that is pretty normal. After this, at the party on November 14th, Lacey told friends she had stopped walking because she was getting nauseous and tired. On November 25th, during another prenatal checkup, Lacey complained of swelling in her extremities. Over Thanksgiving, Lacey accompanied the defendant to Southern California for a baby shower for one of the defendant's family members. While there, the couple went to Disneyland, and even though Lacey was not feeling well and did not want to go, aware of her physical condition, the defendant pushed Lacey in a wheelchair to get around the park. A few weeks before she disappeared, Lacey went to the movies with her mother and her Sharon's good friend, Sandy Rickard. Rickard recalled that Lacey mentioned getting lightheaded when she took the dog for a walk. Also, Lacey complained of feeling tired and heavy. On December 14th, when Lacey arrived at Stacy Boyer's house for the Christmas party, Stacy observed that Lacey was exhausted. At the party, Lacey told her childhood friend, Lori Ellsworth, that she was very tired. Lacey also told Terry Western, Boyer's mother, that she was tired a lot and that it was hard for her to walk. On December 20th, Lacey had a phone conversation with her good friend Renee Tomlinson and told her that she was feeling tired and ready for the baby to arrive. Lacey and her neighbor, Karen Servas, last spoke on December 22nd. Lacey told Servas that she felt tired and had almost fallen into the pool a couple weeks prior because she was off balance. The housekeeper, spa employees, and Amy, Lacey's sister, each observed that Lacey seemed tired or complained of being tired on December 23rd, 2002. Margarita Nava observed that on the day Lacey was moving slowly. Lacey told Michelle Bauer, the spa owner, that she was uncomfortable and having trouble sleeping. Yeah, Jess, that's kind of what I'm feeling looking at all this. Again, I'm not a doctorologist. I've just been pregnant for half of my adult life. And this really feels now it's also on a spectrum. Could she be used to her body being, I mean, she seemed very, very physically fit, very active. It is, you will never be as tired as first trimester tired Look, every pregnant woman knows it. I mean, simply the act of waking up and being a functional human being seems like you are scaling Mount Everest some days in those first trimester days. But it could also be that Lacey was very unaccustomed to her body not doing what she was used to and normal to do. So I'm trying to keep that as sort of a grain of salt that I keep reminding myself. But I also see Scott Peterson as a person who would have jumped at the thought and maybe was a little smarter, or maybe the police didn't put all of these things together, not being pregnant women themselves at one time, to look even further in his, you know, search history to see if he was also searching some shady things about maybe pregnancy interruption or things that can be hazardous to pregnant women. Well, I have 6 kids, so it was, I needed a new hobby. Although the defendant specifically suggested Lacey went walking in La Loma Park, the dirt trail leading from Covina to the park was steep and very, very rough. One woman who walked the neighborhood in the park explained that she could not negotiate the trail when she was pregnant because it was so steep and uneven. Grocery shopping for Christmas brunch. During the interview, the defendant claimed that Lacey was going to the store to buy supplies for Christmas morning breakfast, which required a lot of preparation. Officer Evers also opened the refrigerator door and asked the defendant during the initial walkthrough if it had appeared that Lacey had gone to the store, and the defendant said no. Both statements were inconsistent with the evidence. During the investigation, officers learned that Lacey had gone grocery shopping at Trader Joe's on December 23rd, 2002. She had signed a receipt which showed she checked out at 10:06 a.m., which would mean that there is no way that she and Scott could be watching anything about Martha Stewart and meringue because she was already at the store. Lacey purchased breakfast items, including 3 dozen large grade A cage free eggs, quite a bit of applewood bacon, maple syrup, orange cognac liqueur, heavy cream, toasted oatmeal flakes, freshwater shrimp, cinnamon puffins, and desserts. Moreover, Lacey had a grocery list located inside her purse for items at Trader Joe's, which matched what she purchased on December 23rd. At trial, Lacey's purse and its contents, marked as People's Trial Exhibit number 261A, the purse 262B, contents, were passed for the jurors to inspect. Along Among the items included Lacey's wallet, uh, her driver's license, credit card, and grocery list. It also had a list of her meal plans that week, which indicated she did not have any meals planned for Tuesday and Wednesday was Christmas. Pictured below are 2 photographs taken of the People's Trial Exhibit number 262B, which shows the list the jury saw from reviewing the contents of Lacey's purse during the trial. So, I mean, I don't think Scott understood all of the moving pieces that go into, kind of taking care of a house, taking care of all these things. If you are type A to the max, which Lacey and myself to a lower extent tend to be, we have lists and to-do list everywhere. So it's, not in fact easy to contradict all of the paper evidence that we keep on ourselves. Gingerbread versus gingerbread cookies. During the interview, the defendant told Detective Brocchini that Lacey was going to make gingerbread cookies. However, on December 24th, 2002, when Sharon Rocha asked the defendant what Lacey planned to do all that day, the defendant said she was going to make gingerbread, not gingerbread cookies. Now, I'll give him this because look, my husband would have no idea there's a difference. And, I'll give him that one. Lacey's clothing, black pants and long sleeve white shirt. During the interview, the detective indicated he last saw Lacey wearing black pants and a long sleeve white t shirt top. He didn't know if she was wearing a jacket, and if she was wearing a jacket, whether it was his or hers. The defendant did not check to see if anything was missing. He claimed Lacey was barefoot when he left and that she would typically wear white tennis shoes when she walked. The defendant indicated that Lacey normally keeps them by the wet bar, but they were not there and he didn't look further. As discussed in detail below, when Lacey's body was eventually recovered nearly 4 months later, Lacey was not wearing a white shirt and black pants. The weapon. With respect to the pistol, Detective Brocchini asked the defendant if he would submit to gunshot residue test. The defendant asked if exhaust from an outboard motor might show up as gunshot residue. The detective said that since he had also showered, that it would not. Found in the glove compartment of his truck, the defendant indicated it had been there for a month. He took it to Lone Mountain on a trip with his father to shoot pheasants, but claimed it did not fire, though he tried it twice. When the detective noted that it was not the type of gun used for pheasant hunting, the defendant agreed, no, no. The evidence in or contradicted the statement of the defendant. The defendant's father, Lee Peterson, testified he did not see the defendant with a handgun when they were pheasant hunting in October or November of 2002. Instead, they used 20 gauge shotguns. Well, there you go. The firearm was later examined by the California Department of Justice criminalist Ronald Welsh, who fired the weapon 5 times with ammunition like that found in the gun. The weapon fired normally. Welsh then fired the weapon 4 more times using ammunition found inside the gun, and again it fired normally. Welsh also determined that the firearm had not been fired recently. The mortiser, or whatever it is that thing is called. The defendant claimed he went to his shop to assemble the mortiser, the woodworking tool that was set on his trailer in his warehouse. He claimed to have ordered the mortiser on an eBay auction, just got it, so he assembled it. The evidence indicated that the defendant had received it 4 days earlier. The defendant previously ordered that particular item from an eBay auction, and it was shipped by woodworkingsupply.com via UPS. He picked up the package from Series UPS on December 20th, 2002 at 4:30 p.m. Furthermore, there was also evidence that the defendant had been at his office on December the 23rd, 2002, using his work computer from 9:27 a.m. until 9:42 a.m. and from 11:46 a.m. to 12:28 p.m. He checked his emails. The defendant's timeline of events changed between his two interviews. Let's see here. During his initial interview with David Brocchini, the defendant indicated that he first assembled his woodworking tool, then checked his email and sent one email to his employer, Eric Van Innis, then hooked up the boat and left. The defendant's first version of putting together the woodworking tool, then getting on the computer, was contradicted by the forensic examination of the defendant's work computer, which established that the defendant was on his Dell work laptop beginning at 11:30 a.m. until 10:56 a.m., which contained or created an internal temporary computer file. The defendant conducted various Yahoo searches and searched websites throughout that time, including a search at 10:44 a.m. for directions on how to assemble the woodworking tool. The timeline of the defendant's versions of events changed in his interview with Detective Grogan. The defendant told Detective Grogan that he had arrived at his warehouse, checked out the email on his work computer, and had received an email about a golf bag he was selling on eBay. Here, the physical evidence showed at 8:45 a.m. the defendant used a home computer and sent an email response from his email account, JSC or J Shockley, regarding a golf bag the defendant sold on eBay. David Bracchini asked the defendant why he had patio umbrellas in the bed of his pickup. The defendant said he put them in the bed of the truck that morning with the intention of storing them at the warehouse, but forgot to unload them. Or is a perfect way to hide a body in the back of your truck, allegedly. The umbrellas were in the bed of his truck while the defendant was at the marina. The defendant got back to the warehouse, he unhooked his boat, and forgot to unload the umbrellas again. The defendant told Detective Grogan that after he put the woodworking tool together, the defendant cleaned up his office, unloaded some of the tools from his toolbox, then attached his boat and trailer to the truck and left around 11 a.m. for Berkeley Marina. Well, I mean, he was pretty far in debt if you already have, large umbrellas at home. I mean, I think that this was a last resort scenario for him. I think he was realizing he was very shortly running out of time before, Connor was gonna be there. He could no longer undo this, uh, becoming a parent gig. So I think that I don't know, Mass. The man is so terrible at criming. I can't even. I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's just being like Eagle Scout resourceful, but you know, he possibly is just a giant moron. Let's see here. For the defendant to unload tools in his toolbox, the defendant would have to have been in or next to the bed of his pickup truck where the patio umbrellas were located. Additionally, the defendant had to hook the trailer ball up to his hitch and would have been in the bed of his pickup truck and seen the large patio umbrellas. Yet the defendant maintained during the investigation he forgot about them. In a subsequent interview with David Gorgon on January 3rd, 2003, the defendant reiterated that he put the patio umbrellas in his truck on December 24th, 2002, with the intention to drop them off at his warehouse but forgot to do so. Instead, the defendant took the umbrellas to the marina, where they remained in the bed of his pickup truck while he was out at the bay. He also forgot to drop them off at the warehouse when he unhooked the boat trailer from his truck prior to returning home. 2 versus 3 vote messages. The defendant told Detective Brocchini during his interview that he called Lacey at home as he was leaving the marina and left a message, and then called and left a message for Lacey on her cell phone. He indicated he had called Lacey on her cell phone and left another message when he was in Livermore. During the interview, the defendant pulled out Lacey's phone. He entered the password that was required to get the screen unlocked. The defendant told Detective Bracchini that, or what Lacey's password was, and when he retrieved his voicemail message. The defendant played the message for Detective Bracchini, which indicated it was left at 2:17 p.m. Detective Bracchini pointed out that the defendant that there was only one message on Lacey's phone during the interview. Later, the defendant's cell phone records were obtained and indicated that at 2:12 p.m., the defendant checked his voicemails using a cell tower located at 2600 10th Street in Berkeley, which services the Berkeley Marina. At 2:14 p.m., the defendant called his home telephone at the same while at the same location. At 2:17 p.m., the defendant called Lacey's cell phone, which indicated he was still in Berkeley using the same tower. As discussed in further detail below, the defendant also made phone calls to his good friend, Craig Reed, and 2 calls to his father, Lee Peterson, as he drove back from Berkeley to Modesto. At 5:44 p.m., the defendant's cell phone was used and indicated he was home, based at the cell tower which services the Covina area. A 180-mile trip just to see if it worked. I mean, men have done stranger things for dumber reasons, but okay. During his 2 police interviews, the defendant claimed he, quote, really just wanted to get the boat in the water to see if it worked, end quote. The defendant told detectives that the boat had never been in water and he had only dry started it. He decided to drive 90 miles from home on Christmas Eve to put the boat in water. San Elias County District Attorney's Office investigator Kevin Bertololo Bertolato researched and identified at least 11 different freshwater fishing locales with boat ramps within a range of 9 to 60 miles from the defendant's residence as options for where he could put his boat into the water to see if it worked. Yes, so the wadded, canvas thing was the boat cover. So I'm sure they'll be getting into this because, we're only on lie 16 of like 100 and gajillion at this point. 17, that he fished with a silver lure versus saltwater lures. The defendant told Detective Brocchini that he was out on the water for an hour and a half trolling for fish. The defendant told Detective Grogan and investigator Mansfield that he was on the water for an hour. He went trolling for fish as he made his way to Brooks Island and back. The defendant told Detective Grogan that he was fishing for sturgeon or striper and he was using freshwater lures because he inadvertently left the saltwater lures that he'd purchased for the trip in his truck. This contradicted the defendant's statement he gave to Officer Spurlock less than 24 hours earlier when he was unable to tell Officer Spurlock what exactly he was fishing for. Eh, oh no, Willie Mays died? That's terrible. Let's see here. The defendant said he had used a silver lure. People's 74, pictured below, shows the silver lure and stripe bucktail lure still in their packaging as Detective Brocchini observed them on December 24th and later seized on December 26, 2002, during the execution of the search warrant. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not much of a fisher person, but I do think you have to use the right lure to catch fish in any spot. The evidence did not support the defendant's fishing claim. There were a total of 3 fishing rods located in the warehouse during the subsequent search warrant. However, only one was functional. With respects to the other 2 fishing rods, one was new with a tag still on it, and it had no fishing line. Uh, the other had no handle and was not functional. No worries. I usually get things popping up on the side, but I disabled them because it's hard when where I have it placed on the screen, if they pop up, then it covers what I'm reading. Uh, Angelo Kunyanging, an expert wrangler, uh, Angelo has been fishing for 40 of his 48 years. He and his brother co authored several books on fishing in the Bay, one on fishing for striped bass, and 2 on sturgeon fishing. He also has numerous articles published in fishing magazines and was a presenter at the International Sportsman Exposition. So there you go. Had examined the defendant's equipment and testified at trial about fishing in the San Francisco Bay. Because the defendant's laptop indicated he searched for fishing related websites, both about sturgeon and striped bass on December 8th, 2002, the prosecution asked Angelo about this. Angelo was very familiar with sturgeon fishing on the bay and has caught thousands of them. Bragger. In Angelo's opinion the area around Berkeley Marina was not good for sturgeon fishing. He explained that in December, most sturgeon were running in the northern part of San Francisco Bay, known as San Paulo or Pablo Bay. See, there you go. If you want to catch sturgeon in December, go not to Berkeley Marina. How and furthermore, uh, Angelo pointed out numerous problems with the defendant's fishing equipment as it relates to fishing for sturgeon. Number one, the only functional fishing rod had a line weight of 18 to 20 pounds, which is too light for fishing for sturgeon. Number two, the lure was appropriate for freshwater black bass, but not for sturgeon because it wasn't heavy enough to be used in the bay where currents move swiftly. Uh, Three, live bait was preferred to fishing lures. Typically, sturgeon require a landing net or some type of snare system in which the defendant did not appear to own. And five, the homemade cement weight was insufficient to anchor the defendant's boat because there was nothing on the weight, like a mushroom, that could grab onto the bottom of the bay to keep the boat from drifting. Additionally, although the defendant told both detectives he had been trolling for fish on the bay, explained that it was illegal to troll for sturgeon. Scott, you had access to Ask Jeeves. I mean, I swear to goodness, the search engine that I wish they would bring back, but you had access to this. It's not like you didn't have, Encyclopedia Britannica somewhere. For the love of all that is holy. Or to be fair, Mass, he could also be like me, where I research maybe about 2 things about something that looks really exciting and, uh, jump into something not realizing the incredible complexity, like, streaming or something. As for striped bass, Angelo stated that the best time to fish was in spring through early fall on San Pablo Bay. The same fishing equipment that was used for catching sturgeon could be used for fishing for striped bass since both type of fish fed on the bottom of the bay during winter months. Therefore, according to Angelo, the defendant's equipment was not suitable for catching striped bass. Although one of the defendant's lures could be used for striped bass, live bait was used in winter months since striped bass fed at the bottom of the bay in winter. The other problem with the defendant's lure is that it could only sink 5 to 8 feet into the water, not deep enough to reach striped bass feeding at much lower depths at the bottom of the bay. The defendant's other lures were used for rock fishing or fishing near deep reefs in the ocean, not on the bay. Oh, the really bad one, a faithful marriage. Uh, Your Honor, I'd like to plead the fifth. I cannot incriminate myself. During his first interview, the defendant assured Detective Brocchini that there were no problems in his marriage. And that's because, in Scott's mind, there really were no problems in his marriage now. I mean, it makes a perverse sort of sense that Scott now believes that he no longer has a wife, so he was really not really cheating on his marriage because she was no longer there to, count as being a wife. I mean, his ability to see the truth as, "I reject your reality and substitute my own," told the detective that his marriage was aces and nothing was wrong. In a second interview, investigator Mansfield specifically asked the defendant if there were any problems in his marriage or there were any third parties involved. Defendant said that neither he or Lacey were involved with anyone outside the marriage. He's like, "No, I just have a girlfriend." I mean, is that bad? I, I was like, in my defense, I told her my wife and child were already gone. In addition to the defendant's lies about the affair with Amber Fry to Detective Brocchini and Detective Grogan, the defendant lied to Ron Gransky when Ron questioned him. The defendant lied to Brett Rocha about having an affair. As discussed below, the defendant went so far as to suggest that a photo which depicted him with Amber Fry at a Christmas party was doctored in some fashion to include him. Allegedly. Uh, the defendant would further lie on national television during an interview with Diane Sawyer when he claimed he told the police about his affair with Amber right away. A fishy story. Although Gransky went fishing on Christmas Eve, he was an avid fisherman and fished often. Gransky fished about 16.5 miles away from his home while Sharon was at an afternoon matinee. Even though Ron had asked the defendant to go fishing on numerous occasions, the defendant only accepted the offer one time. After the trip, the defendant told Gransky to keep his expensive fishing pole at Ron's house, and he never asked for it again. Either Christmas afternoon or the day after, Ron Gransky confronted the defendant about his fishing trip. Gransky said, "You know, I think your Berkeley fishing trip is a fishy story." Gransky inquired about whether he did something else or whether he had a girlfriend and went to see his girlfriend. Gransky told the detective or the defendant that he should admit now or the defendant was going to look a lot worse. The defendant replied no and turned and walked away. Police watched the warehouse on Christmas night, but not his home. Detective Grogan called in another detective to secure the warehouse at 1027 North Emerald Avenue through the night and not let anyone go inside in order to protect any potential evidence before they executed a search warrant. Detective Grogan did not, however, secure the house because there had been a large number of people over at the house, friends and family members, and it seemed that the destruction of of the evidence was less of an issue since officers had previously walked through the house and there were a lot of people present. Detective Grogan did not want to displace them overnight on Christmas. The defendant vacuums in front of the washer and dryer. Yes, man who never cleans anything suddenly becomes Martha freaking Stewart. About 5 p.m. on Christmas, Stacy Boyers returned to the defendant's house because Renee Tomlinson said there was a media truck coming to do an interview and asked Stacy to bring over a picture of Lacey. Stacy walked into the house and the defendant's parents had just gotten there. She said hi to Jackie, who indicated she was there for her son. The defendant was vacuuming in the little alcove area where the washer and dryer are located. Stacy asked him what he was doing. The defendant did not stop vacuuming and replied he just couldn't keep the house clean enough. However, he only vacuumed that little alcove area right in front of the wash machine and dryer. Number or letter F, are you guys using cadaver dogs? Well, I mean, don't look suspicious or anything. At 6:30 p.m., the defendant called David Brocchini to ask how the search was going in Dry Creek Park. Detective Brocchini told the defendant they had a team of officers in the park who did grid search all night long. In the morning, they brought in fresh officers and redid the whole park search, conducting another grid style search in the daytime. They had 3 canine dog teams in there. They used a helicopter with FLIR, which is like a personal heat sensor that, can detect maybe body heat. So it won't really show up like actual regular heat, but it will show where something is maybe hotter, could be a human body. And they also had a horseback officers coming in. The defendant wanted to know if the police were using cadaver dogs. Cadaver dogs scent and track the scent of decay or dead flesh. Detective Brocchini replied that he did not consider Lacey dead yet, so no, the police were not using cadaver dogs. G, the defendant, upset police, was had taken his gun and rags. At about the same time, Karen Service service came to the defendant's house because she wanted to watch the local news and see if they were going to report Lacey missing. By that time, Jackie and Lee Peterson and Renee Tomlinson and her husband were the only ones at the house. When Karen finished watching the news, the defendant invited Karen to stay for turkey dinner. However, she declined because she was a vegetarian. The defendant called Karen approximately 10 minutes after she returned home and said he had found some cheese tortellini and asked her to come back for dinner. When she returned for dinner, it was just the defendant and his parents there. The defendant's father, Lee Peterson, was really upset and crying. The defendant's mother, Jackie, was also upset. In contrast, the defendant was very calm. He complained he was a little upset because when he got home, he noticed the police took his gun and some rags out of the house without telling him. H. A Christmas call to Amber from Maine before bed. Later that Christmas evening, Amber went with Sean Sibley to Sibley's uncle's house for Christmas. Amber was upset because she tried to call the defendant on Christmas, but he didn't answer. Doug Sibley, Sean's uncle, then took Amber's phone and left the defendant a voice message about not calling a young lady on Christmas when the defendant said he would. Shortly after leaving the message, the defendant called Amber between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. The defendant told Amber he was in Maine and getting ready to go to bed because of the time difference. Amber could hear a woman's voice in the background, and the defendant said it was his mother coming to sit down next to him. He could hear the woman saying something and the defendant talking to her. Then the defendant began talking to Amber again and indicated he told his mother that she could not sit down right next to him. The defendant shifted the conversation to nursery rhymes about five ducks who go out to play and asked Amber to sing that for him when they saw her the next time. Sir, what the actual hell? The community and media respond. A. Amber receives her Christmas gift. On Thursday, December 26th, at 2002, Amber repeatedly called and tried to get a hold of the defendant. However, she was unsuccessful. She wanted to tell him she had received his Christmas present. The defendant had sent her a Star Theater planetarium that projects stars onto the ceiling as a gift. Although the defendant was supposed to be out of state, the package had a return mailing address of the defendant's warehouse located at 1027 North Emerald Street, B1 Modesto. B. Police continued their systematic search outward. Meanwhile, on December 26th through 2002, police continued to search for Lacey. Police focused their search at Dry Creek Park and the Modesto area in the days immediately following Lacey and Connor's disappearance. A police command center was set up in East Loloma Park. Searchers continued to scour neighborhoods and parks. They checked rivers, canals, other waterways, inspected local orchards, dug through bushes, piles of leaves, and even vacant homes. C, the media reacts and a reward is offered. The police department had alerted the press. Beginning the morning of December 26, 2002, the media began to show up in the Covina neighborhood. At 8 a.m., the defendant called Detective Grogan and said news crews had arrived at his house and they were requesting a statement from members of the family. The defendant advised that he was going to work with the press, but the news crews were requesting a member of the police department to respond to the interview as well. Detective Grogan arranged for Modesto Police Department's Public Information Officer, or PIO, to coordinate with the media while he continued to investigate and follow up on various leads. By noon, there were a lot of media trucks near the defendant's house. People were standing in the front yard with microphones attempting to talk. With the media interest, a reward for information leading to Lacey and Connor's return grew to $500,000. In March 2003, an additional award of $50,000 was offered for any information leading to the recovery of Lacey's body. As further discussed in detail below, no one ever came forward to provide credible information and claim either reward. The volunteer center is set up. Lacey's Friends makeshift volunteer center at 523 Covina Avenue was getting too big due to too many people, so Stacy Boyer's mother, Kim Western, and Kim McNeely got a room at the Red Lion Hotel on December 26, 2002. Additionally, since the police were serving a search warrant at the defendant's house, no one was allowed in. After that, the Red Lion Hotel agreed to provide them with a conference room to use as a volunteer center. The hotel had computers and phone lines set up for them to use when people called in tips and to make a website. Lacey's friend, Renee Tomlinson, ran the center until it closed in January 2003. Kim Western and Lori Ellsworth were there daily from when it opened until it closed. There were volunteers working full time to find Lacey. People were able to gather and pick up flyers, and there were maps on the walls for areas for people to search. There were pictures of Lacey portrayed at the volunteer center. The Sund Carrington Foundation got involved and helped coordinate a visual on New Year's Eve. The defendant made a rule that no pictures of him with Lacey, such as wedding photos, were permitted to be posted in the volunteer center or provided to the media. He claimed he was doing this out of the goodness of his heart and wanted it to be about Lacey. The defendant also made a rule that the media were not permitted at the house until 9:30 a.m., which is when the defendant would leave, if not sooner. Uh, and if someone had put up a picture that included the defendant with Lacey, it would be taken down. At one point, the defendant left a thank you note for volunteers on the door of the center, which he signed Lacey's husband instead of his name. I mean, sir, could you get any more? I am going to be looking all of the guilty. I think I am going to stop there because this looks like it's going to start getting much more detailed, and I want to be able to have my little rolling dry erase board of truth so that we can start kind of going through all the places that they looked and all the things that haven't added up with him. Thank you for joining me for about this 2 hours. I get to go and talk, to my husband and get more laundry done. And Mass, I think it's okay that we have different opinions. I think, unfortunately, I might not be able to be as objective about this case because of the absolute douchebag he was to Lacey and lying to people. Those are not so easy for me to overcome and remain objective. What I will say is what the state has set up so far is that there really weren't other people in Lacey's life that were close to her that seemed to have a reason or a motive to do this. Now, what the state hasn't proven yet to me is that there was absolutely no possibility that a third party did this. Now, I'm willing to listen to opinions that go into that, and I'm not fully, you know, ruling it out as of yet with what the state has already presented. But I will say that with every gathering piece of who had the means and, opportunity and, you know, ability to do this, it does seem like that circle is closing ever tighter on Scott Peterson. Now, the particular DNA that they want to retest has, as I read in the earlier bit of this memo, and you can read it, or you can watch it on part one. But this particular DNA that they would like to have retested, Scott Peterson and the Innocence Project, has been tested twice before, leading to no exonerating evidence of note. So I am willing to entertain if the defense is able to show me, and unfortunately, we're getting a huge information dump from the state before I can go to the defense's sort of request for this DNA. But the window of opportunity for some random ninja guy to come in is closing for me. It's not completely gone. The state hasn't totally proven, and that's why I think I'm gonna stop here so we can have the whiteboard. In fact, Mr. Mo is gonna see if we can move things around so the murder board of truth can be back here, so I don't have to use the rolly wheels. But I think it's okay for us to have different viewpoints on this. I think it's healthy, and we can have different things, and there are gonna be cases where one can be maybe more objective. Like the Karen Reed case, uh, I can think they all looked a bit jerky, depending on how you looked at it, but I can definitely be more objective. This case maybe brings up a little bit more of me being the person to ignore red flags and just the terrible waste of, a woman becoming a mom and this innocent, precious child. It does kind of wear on me, but I am doing my best to maintain an open mind as much as I can. But right now, there are still things that the state needs to prove to me. And then once we get through with this memo, we'll look at, what the Innocence Project is saying, because, I do wanna try to look at both sides, but I am not seeing someone else that would randomly go up to this woman and perform a high risk, high visibility abduction in the middle of the day, or even, as posited by, others, that a house, I think, break-in that occurred several days before or after, and I'm sure they'll get into it next, uh, that people that were, breaking into a house across the street would go through and do another high risk, high, visibility crime of, trying to abduct a heavily pregnant woman from her home. So I do think that it is, um, definitely good to remember that we can all have different opinions, and it's good to see things differently because, I honestly haven't I don't come up with all these ideas, and if you can prove to me that they're somewhat reasonable, then I'm willing to give it a chance. But I am gonna let you guys go. I am going to go get some lunch somewhere for something. I don't know yet. But I will see you guys tomorrow, and yes, Aunt Bev's wig has come in. So, mornings with Mo tomorrow will be morning with Aunt Bev. So, don't be a stranger because I have to now go work on Miss Lolly, you can't ask it that way. Mr. Jackson, no comments. You always say okay, but you always make the comments. So I have to work on my Bev listening skills so I can deeply get her both utter frustration and, as Jamie would put it, or her chip chop chip attitude in. So I'll be looking forward to debuting Auntie Bev tomorrow for Mornings with Mo. And I will see you guys then. Have a lovely rest of your day. Enjoy this federal holiday. I know it is Juneteenth. I, look, we're not having a barbecue or anything. We're basically celebrating Mr. Mo getting a day off by working on the laundry room. But yeah, actually, definitely want to look at both sides. I guess as always happens with me, I greatly overestimate my free time, so I thought I can get through this in like 2, 3 days, and then I lost my voice and everything else. So, we are slowly but surely getting through this. We are at page 103 of 337. So, uh well, that's why I think maybe we can do a panel when it comes to the defenses stuff, because I want to be able to see maybe blind spots that I don't have. I am definitely working on getting out of my safe bubble of just talking to myself. So I will be endeavoring to work at more collaborative group projects and things like that in the near future. But I'm going to let you guys go because, you know, it's a carb, but a bagel with some butter on it sounds like it's calling my name. Have a lovely day, everyone. Please like and subscribe and share if you know someone who knows a lot about this case, or maybe you think could be a fan of learning some more. Bye, guys. Have a lovely afternoon and evening. Do not forget to go over to Baker's tonight at 8 p.m. for his Karen Reed panel with, I think, Ian Runkle. You've got Melanie Little, the Young Jerks, and maybe a couple different people in Valhalla. So don't forget to check them out and support, our fellow creators doing good jobs. Bye, guys.